Hello, everyone. I hope that you had a good few weeks back home.
Everybody, hope you had a good couple of weeks in your constituencies. We are here for 2 hours this afternoon. The first hour will be with Madame la Ministre Joly, qui va parler à propos.
The minister will touch on a number of topics from the Department of Industry.
Of officials that are going to stick around for the second hour. Je peux confirmer que tous les tests.
I can confirm that all audio-visual tests have been completed.
To Standing Order 81-4 and the motion adopted by this committee on Thursday, March the 12th, 2026, for us to commence a study on the main estimates, and pursuant to Standing Order 1082, a motion adopted by us on that same day to study the subject matter of the supplementary estimates 2025-2026. With that, Madame la Ministre, je vous donne la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
I'll hand it over to you, Madam Minister. Thank you. I am very happy to be here today.
We're going through a moment right now of profound global transformation, as we know. We're living through a period of significant economic change. Around the world, governments are moving quickly to secure supply chains and protect strategic industries, and trade patterns are shifting. We all know that. And uncertainty is no longer the exception, it's actually the environment in which we operate. We have seen this firsthand in recent months, from decisions taken in Washington to growing protectionism and direct impacts on sectors such as aerospace, steel, and auto. Mr. Chair, let's put it bluntly, we are in a trade war. And so Canada has been required to respond in real time. We know these pressures will continue, but we also know this, that while there are many things in the world that we cannot control, and we certainly cannot control what's going on in Washington, there are many things we can control here at home. In 2025, we were much more in reaction mode. In 2026, we have a plan, and we're putting it into place. And so the results are already there. L'an dernier, le Canada a créé 189.
Last year, 180,000 jobs were created in Canada, much more than the U.S., despite a 10 times smaller economy. And our approach is simple and targeted. That is to say, 3 verbs: protect, create, and attract. First of all, protect jobs. In sectors like steel, aluminum, forestry, critical minerals, and manufacturing, Canadian workers are facing real pressures, and so we have acted. We have reinforced our trade rules so that we're more competitive and in a fair way. We have also enhanced supports for sectors where they have greater liquidity. There was a recent announcement of $1 billion for the BDC, which targets to reinforce the country's economic resiliency, especially for key sectors like steel, aluminum, and copper. And we've put in place a new envelope, $5.5 million, as part of the regional response to tariffs. And that is there to help companies that have been affected by the tariffs in all sectors. And we're working directly with businesses in order to maintain production and protect jobs everywhere in the country. That is definitely the case in the area of the automotive industry.
Actually, over 90% of Canada's auto production is exported to a single market that is now facing tariffs. And we acted quickly. Through our auto strategy, we're protecting over 500,000 jobs while positioning Canada for the future. And within the next 5 years, we know that 40% of vehicles sold globally are expected to be electric. So Canada will not fall behind, and we will lead. We're supporting companies as they invest and adapt, and rewarding those who choose Canada and invest in Canadian workers. Through the Strategic Response Fund, we have committed $3 billion to help firms diversify, modernize, and compete globally. We're also prioritizing Canadian sourcing through procurement and strengthening domestic supply chains to reduce vulnerability. At the same time, we're leveraging our 52 trade agreements to expand into new markets. We know resilience requires diversification and strength. And this is why I also announced last Friday 200 new jobs and a $76 million federal investment to Tenaris project in Sault Ste. Marie. And this will modernize and diversify Canadian steel production and strengthen our domestic industrial base. So basically, our plan is working. Now, second, as we're creating jobs, we want to make sure that we're building industries for the future. We're advancing major national projects. Of course, we're thinking of nuclear reactors in Darlington and in the high-speed rail between Toronto and Quebec City. We're also accelerating approvals for major projects. We're investing in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and advanced manufacturing. And we're supporting the scaling up of Canadian firms through access to capital and helping companies grow into global leaders. And we recently announced $55.7 million to MDS Coatings, and that's a very important company in PEI, and that is maintaining and creating up to 230 good-paying careers on the island, and that's in the aerospace sector. Et troisièmement, notre objectif, c'est d'attirer des talents.
Third, our objective is to attract talent and investments. At a time when a number of countries are turning inwards, we are actually moving forward, and we're opening up even further. We have launched an ambitious strategy to attract the best researchers with a budget of $1 billion. The goal is to attract the best researchers to our universities and at the same time to be able to create a space where we can create more support between our universities and the industry so that Canada be a hub for innovation. And to conclude, we are working currently to attract better capital. The best example I can give you, a number of you already know, it's the fact that AirAsia chose Canada by buying 150 new Airbus 220 aircraft here in Quebec at Mirabel, and this is the largest order in our history. And so it is really a vote of confidence towards our workers and our sector. And for the rest, Mr. Chair, while I could talk to you about the Defense Industry Initiative, we want to create 125,000 jobs, and we want to be able to recreate an industrial base in the defense sector. But I could talk to you about that, but we're short on time.
And in a world of increasing geopolitical competition, Canada must act from a position of strength. We must strengthen our domestic capacity and reduce vulnerability. And Mr. Chair, Canada is not standing still. We're protecting what we have built. We're creating what comes next, and we're attracting the people and the capital that will define our future. So thank you. I'm ready to answer all of your questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Minister. And in my excitement to get us going, I forgot to introduce your colleague, so I'm going to take a moment to do that.
Yours.
Joining us is Valerie Huot, who is the acting Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Deputy Minister, and with her is Mark Shawn, Associate Deputy Minister. So thank you very much to my colleagues on this side for allowing me the grace to make that introduction. With that, we will go into our first line of questioning, and Madame Dancho, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, and her colleagues for being with us today. Minister, you outlined in part the crisis facing our auto sector. Can you clearly outline the top-line argument you have for importing 49,000 Chinese EVs into Canada, how that will benefit or not our domestic auto manufacturing sector?
I think the plan was clear, and the Prime Minister mentioned it at the time. Our goal was to make sure that, first, we would be able to support our canola farmers that are so important in the prairies, as you know. Second, being able also to protect our fishers that have been also targeted by tariffs, and that was good for people in Atlantic Canada and also in the north and the west coast. And third, in 2023, Canada was already importing 43,000 cars from China, and this is a small increase from what we were in 2023.
I appreciate you bringing up the agricultural exports because, as you know, that's not really an equal exchange the way that your government negotiated. It's only a temporary reprieve of some of the agricultural export controls that China put on us. Pork still remains, canola oil still remains, and the reprieve that you did get is expiring by the end of this year. But when these Chinese EVs come into Canada, as you well know, they're here to stay. So you didn't negotiate a long-term agreement for our canola farmers, and so they don't think that exchange is quite how you're selling it. But I am glad that you brought up 2023 Because it was the following year, about a year and a half ago, I suppose, that you yourself, as you know, put in quite strong restrictions for Chinese electric vehicles. In fact, you said the reason was because they would put unwarranted downward pressure on pricing, challenging the profitability of Canadian producers, and they would reduce choice by crowding out other imports. And you were really correct in that instance, Minister. Of course, in Mexico, Indonesia, Brazil, Australia, most places that have allowed Chinese EVs have crowded out that market and jeopardize that domestic supply chain. So again, I'm not clear why you're bringing these in when we're facing such a crisis in the auto sector in Canada.
So first and foremost, when it comes to our negotiation with China, I think that many premiers were actually very positive regarding the importance of this deal and the consequences on Canadians, particularly actually in the prairies, including Premier Moe, Conservative Premier. And I think that it was important to be able to settle key issues, particularly when it comes to agriculture. At the same time,
But they're not
I think it was important.
Those issues are not settled, Minister.
I think it is important to be able also to understand that 49,000 vehicles, while being important, is some less than 3% of the entire
But
production in
40% for
Canada. I'm
electric
sorry, my
vehicles.
colleague is talking over me, so I just want to finish my answer.
Yeah, Madame Dancho, I'm going to give the Minister another kind of 20 or so here to wrap up her response, at which point we'll go back to you.
So my point is less than 3% of production, and in that sense, we are working already with many companies who will be importing to Canada, but at the same time, we're trying to support not only ongoing production in Canada, but actually increase in production, and that's exactly what has happened in the last year. There's been an increase in production in the auto sector.
The agriculture issue is not by any means settled. Again, it's a temporary reprieve on part of the agricultural exports. And in fact, in the last 10 years that you have been a minister and that the Liberal government has been in power, the Chinese government has used our agriculture and our farmers as a baton to beat Canada with, to coerce us with, over 4 or 5 times, I believe. So consistently, this is an issue that you have failed to resolve in the long term. Another of the issues that you cited, sort of one of the 3 standards you said last time you were here of allowing these vehicles into Canada was labor standards. So I want to go back to the forced labor issue. You said to my colleague, Mr. Falk, that your point of view will always be to follow what the UN is saying. The UN is unequivocal. And of course, as you know, from the Office of the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, they've said that there was various coercive methods being used to secure surplus laborers in Xinjiang. There are serious human rights violations have been committed in Tuar. A UN 2022 report said there are indications that labor and employment schemes appear to be discriminatory in nature, involve elements of coercion. In January of this year, UN experts expressed deep concern regarding persistent allegations of forced labor. They went on to say in many cases, the coercive elements are so severe that they may amount to forcible transfer or enslavement as a crime against humanity. So if you're agreeing with the UN, how are you allowing the import of vehicles that may have aluminum in them, for example, that's been traced to forced labor? How are you justifying this?
So, Mr. Chair, there was an entire testimony on my part 3 weeks ago, just before the recess, where I spent an hour explaining our position on EVs. I think there's been an entire study on the part of parliamentarians. So, of course, everything that I said at the time still holds, and everything that I said on forced labor still holds.
But at the time, you sort of kicked the bucket over to CBSA and your public safety colleague. You said that he'll deal with it. But if you agree that there's forced labor going on, you have allowed this negotiation to allow these 49,000 vehicles to enter, and you're saying, well, public safety will deal with it. So it's just not a nonsensical position. Either you believe that this is happening, that they therefore should not come in, or you're kicking it over to public safety to say, well, maybe he'll catch them. So are you saying, is your position then that public safety and CBSA will turn them away? Is that the position of the federal government?
So I think that you're making an assumption on the 49,000 EVs that is only linked to different Chinese auto companies, which I would challenge. And we are
so indeed
having.
You don't believe they have forced labor elements?
Can I just finish my answer?
Yeah, and we're going to be over time, so I'm going to give the Minister the opportunity to reply.
There will be lots of Western auto companies shipping their cars to Canada, and eventually there will be also Chinese
BYD?
one, but at this point, the allocation of the 49,000 is not over yet.
Okay, thank you very much, Madame Dancho. Madame O'Rourke, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Carr. Welcome, Madam Minister. Lovely to see you again. So because we're speaking about the estimates and about these significant investments in supporting industries that have been fully attacked in this trade war, and also helping other industries to develop, to take advantage of a number of new opportunities: defense, aerospace, nuclear, electricity, infrastructure, major projects, the Buy Canadian policy. So we're investing in shoring up and protecting some industries and then expanding others. And so I'm wondering if you would like to share with us, and I should add also making sure that we train the people to do the building here in Canada. What are you hearing from Canadian industry in terms of the steps the government has taken in the past year to support them through the trade war, to help them pivot, and what's their feeling about all of the opportunity that is before us in the coming years?
Listen, it's been a tough year for many Canadian businesses dealing with so much uncertainty at a time where a lot of their business model has been very much focused towards exporting to the U.S., and that's definitely the business model of the steel was the business model, the steel sector, of the aluminum sector, of the auto sector, of the forestry sector, and many of the small and medium-sized businesses across the country. Now, we still have the best deal on planet Earth when it comes to access to the U.S., but the tariffs have been impacting a lot of people. That being said, I think the reaction is it has been positive because first, we have a plan, and second, as our plan is being put into place, really it is working. The best example I can give you is actually Tenaris, where I was last week with Premier Ford, which we all know, the Ontario Premier. So we were in Sault Ste. Marie, and we announced 200 new jobs, an investment of more than $70 million. And that investment was possible because of the fact that we've approved many of the energy sector projects out in the West. And now Tenaris, which is a global company, has decided to invest more in their basically pipes and tubes processing because they believe that the demand is increasing in Canada and therefore there's a business model for it. And what does that mean? It means that it's good news for Algoma and in Sault Ste. Marie, but it's also good news for Tenaris. At the same time, the other example I could give you is definitely the defense sector. You know, we started from having nearly no defense sector, a very small defense sector in Canada, to an opportunity that is actually one of the biggest commercial opportunity in decades. We came up with this defense industrial strategy. Our goal is, of course, to create 125,000 jobs, and I said that in my introductory remarks. But why say that? It is actually, of all the industrial strategies that the government has ever announced, it is the most funded since the Second World War because it's supported by a $500 billion budget. And so what are we doing? What are we seeing concretely? We're seeing the aerospace sector really investing and trying to create new jobs. And that was the example of MDS Coating that is in PEI, the biggest private investment and federal investment also that we've seen in the last decades in PEI. That's in the aerospace sector, creating and maintaining 230 jobs. We're seeing that also in investments, also in the aerospace sector in Mirabel, actually in L3 Harris, and also in Airbus. We're also seeing that across the country as we know that the manufacturing sector is affected by the tariffs. And my last point would be, we know that the auto sector is really, really impacted. And so we want to make sure that even certain plants could work on the defense front to be able to save the jobs.
Great. I'd like to thank you, Minister, for responding very quickly to the new interpretation of Section 232 tariffs for steel, aluminum, and copper. Thank you for really the immediate response with the $1.5 billion support for those industries. It's meant a lot to Southwestern Ontario. What are you hearing from people on the ground?
Well, I'm hearing particularly people in Southwestern Ontario, and I know you represent Well Guelph, and you've been a strong advocate for the manufacturing sector in the region. Dominic, I think that the support has been timely. I think that we need to react quickly. Why? Because the White House had changed its interpretation of the steel and aluminum tariffs and expanded it to derivative products, and companies that were not necessarily impacted by tariffs were now impacted because basically their interpretation is now on the full value of the product in which steel and or aluminum can be included. And so based on that, we need to come up with some real support, which is not only support for through loans, but also through subsidies in order to protect also companies and not have them go into a spiral of debt. It was also influenced by what we did last time during the Section 232 tariffs under the first Trump administration. And so basically, based on that, we decided to go further, and I think the reaction is good. But let me be frank, we're not claiming victory whatsoever. We will continue to work with the sectors that are impacted, and we'll continue to be in listening mode and action mode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci, Madame O'Rourke. Thank you, Madame O'Rourke. Monsieur Sainte-Marie, c'est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Oui, merci.
Mr. Sainte-Marie, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, Mr. Chan, Madame Huot, thank you for being here. First of all, there was a question where you talked about canola oil from out west and Chinese EVs. Now, for pork coming from Quebec, that's a very important subject for our producers. It's important to have an option for Asia and for China, who is a large client. Madam Minister, 3 weeks ago, you were with us. We see each other quite often at this committee. Yes, I'm very readily available. It's incredible. Now, about the EVs, the total of the amounts given for batteries per province, I think we haven't got that amount yet at committee, but I had asked you, well, Ms. O'Rourke addressed this topic, the American president's decree at the beginning of April. We wanted to know who was affected, how many SMEs per region, per sector. And I had said at the time, for example, Ms. Gould had cited at this committee the study of the University of Calgary. She said that about 60% of exported products from Ontario and Quebec could be targeted. And Desjardins published a study and said that it's more a quarter of products from Quebec that would be affected. These are businesses from Quebec, then, that would be the most affected. So if your department could provide us with an overview of what the situation is, that would be good. Thank you. If I could just answer that, first of all, about the Quebec pork, yes, no problem. We are making representations, and we're very aware of the issue, and I'm working with the Minister of Agriculture on that, and with the Prime Minister, and with the Premier. So we don't want to have any tariffs on our products. And everything that has to do with, fish and seafood, with China, of course. So 1 and 2. Now, as for your 2 requests, Gabrielle, yes, you had requested that, and I will get back to you. I had agreed to do so. Just to clarify something so that Marc and Valérie can hear it, the total, the amounts given per province and the number of SMEs per region and per sector that are affected by the American tariffs. Yes, based on the last decree by the president for copper and steel. Yes, we have our interpretation, but I don't think that we're going to have a set point of view. There are a lot of businesses that are gradually realizing that they are affected or not, and so sometimes, how could I say it? It's the interpretation isn't clear-cut. However, we decided not to wait and to come up with our own approach. So we will have a better reading of the situation once the BDC gives us their summary of the request and the economic development region agencies as well. Okay. Tell me, has your government addressed the issue of this decree with the American administration? Could it be changed possibly, or is it like everything else? Well, I've spoken a number of times on this with Dominique Leblanc and with the Prime Minister, and Minister Leblanc is very much aware. And even this morning, there was a discussion with Secretary Greer, but I think the request has to be made directly. But from my side, I'm in charge of impacts from tariffs. So I'm working with Minister Leblanc and with Tana Sherritt, the Prime Minister's representative for negotiations, and with the ambassador in Washington, Mr. Wiseman, and of course with the Prime Minister. Thank you very much. As for the $1.5 billion help plan, we heard about that. We thank you very sincerely. One concern that I'm hearing from SMEs, the $500 million for the machinery purchase plan that enhances productivity. It's an excellent plan, but it might not be the best adapted to SMEs who have fewer, orders, and so they may not be able to buy new machines. Now, the loans program, there was a fear around this. That is to say that targeted businesses, well, what I heard from them is that, it's a $100,000 or $200,000 loan that they would have access to when they ran into trouble. But getting a $2 million loan, that's much bigger. Could the amounts be modified? I am completely willing to change the criteria. We've always been able to adapt, but my fear, well, we're working a lot with the larger businesses that place, big orders, and we have to look at the smaller and medium-sized enterprises. And I talked to the Prime Minister about this. I'm very open to feedback, and we're also in contact with a number of SMEs who give us their feedback, and I'd be happy to work with them and with you. Thank you. Thank you once again, Melanie. Thank you for everything. Now, the forestry crisis. Once again, there was the BDC program to support forestry businesses that are having a hard time. Some of them didn't qualify, and recently I heard that there could be an openness to reassess the program to extend the assistance. Could you give us some details on that? And at the same time, well, unions in this sector are suggesting that the government could take charge of the half of the offset amounts for companies that are exporting. And that could be in a certain fund, and businesses have always won over the course of the years with the American government, and then the federal government could get paid back at that time. Is this a strategy that you're studying at the moment? All right. This MP is excellent with his timing. He's asked some questions knowing very well there's not enough time for the answer. Well, I'll keep track of the time for the others as well. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would tell you that Tim Hodgson is working with the industry and unions. In fact, he's created a consultation roundtable. That's going to happen very soon. I'll have the opportunity to work with him and the Prime Minister very soon, this week actually, and with the Prime Minister. Where I get involved is, well, since the BDC has been involved since the beginning, and I'm in charge of the BDC, we've heard that program doesn't go far enough, and that's why we have made some changes around copper, aluminum, and steel, and we'll do that for forestry as well. And my colleague, Mr. Hodgson, will be announcing, I believe, good news for the sector, for the sectors that are very much affected. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to talk a little bit more about the security implications of the Chinese EVs. As you know, your government has banned TikTok from government devices. You've prohibited Huawei and had all of the technology and cell phones removed from Canada. And the RCMP and Ontario, in fact, today as well, has now restricted the use of just Chinese EV drones, all for very similar security issues. And as you're well aware, CSIS has said that the People's Republic of China is Canada's greatest espionage and foreign interference threat, and that its activities threaten Canada's national security and long-term economic prosperity. And your former colleague, Chrystia Freeland, has also said that absolutely your government was considering banning Chinese-made software and electric vehicles to counter the security threat from China. And you cited similar rationale in your ban from a year and a half ago. So I guess my question is, really nothing has changed in terms of the security threat from the software. Last time you were here, you said you're working on a framework, But the import of these is now allowed. So is this framework considering banning the software from those vehicles? Are they going to come in as some sort of empty shells in that regard? Or
So I think these are really good questions that should be asked to the Minister of Public Safety and also Minister of Transport as they're working on a new
you're working on
software
that with them,
approach when
right?
it comes to EVs. Thank you.
But you're working on that with them. You said that last time you were here. Are you not being consulted
I am,
on
but
it?
I'm not in charge of CSIS.
Right, but you're being consulted on the framework. That's what you said last time you were here?
Yes, of course, when it comes to our industrial capacity, of course.
Okay, so you're not concerned about the security implications? That's not your job to worry about that? You're just bringing them in?
My question is, if you have specific demands linked to CSIS and their analysis, you know very well, being a very seasoned MP, that this is not under my purview. Of course, I'll work with them, but I don't have specific intelligence.
It was your analysis a year and a half ago when you banned them.
Any form of the.
That was your analysis.
Can I just finish
well.
my answer?
Yeah.
I would like to finish my answer.
Yeah, go ahead, Minister.
So as I was saying, if there's specific intel linked to Chinese EVs that are linked to the software per se, of course we will take that into account. Of course we will be working as a team. Okay. But right now you're asking me questions that are linked to the Minister of Public Safety that is extremely important.
You made the
agreement.
And
I don't want them to be unanswered, and so that's why I think it should be him answering that.
You made the agreement. Did you not make the agreement? Was that you were not in charge of the agreement to bring in 49,000 Chinese EVs?
I was working with the Prime Minister, and I stand by it. And I think it was a very good agreement, and I think Canadians vastly support it.
It's interesting that you won't answer the security questions. I will put one more question to you. Michael Kovrig was here, and I know that you know who he is. He said a very interesting quote, and I want your perspective on it. The PRC weaponizes technology, supply chains, market access to coerce acquiescence to its geopolitical agenda. China's ambassador just demonstrated this when he pressed Canada to weaken the long-standing policy on Taiwan. Importing Chinese EVs means importing predatory, monopolistic behavior that our companies can't survive, labor conditions that our workers won't tolerate, and infringement of sovereignty that our nation shouldn't accept. Do you agree with Mr. Kovrig?
So I have a lot of time and respect for Mr. Kovrig. I've talked with him and worked with him on many occasions. And I also think that it is important for us to be able to have a relationship with China, including on the industrial front, where we are able to do business together, because we do business together. And we do business together because a lot of our great farmers and fishers send a lot of great Canadian products there. We have also a lot of our financial sector that is in China. We have also many service providing companies that are there. And meanwhile, we import from China many, many goods that Canadians enjoy every single day.
Just don't seem to be concerned with the cost that this may be to Canada, but we'll move on, Mr. Chair. With my remaining time, I'd like to give the last minute to Mr. Guglielmin.
Yeah, so a lot of crosstalk there. Minister, I'm going to give you 15 seconds to finalize that thought. I've paused the clock. Mr. Guglielmin, when you take over, you'll have 60 seconds, which means you have time for probably a question. Minister,
just real quick,
At the time where
we're victim of a trade war by the U.S., Canada needs to be able to have a relationship with China that is stable, that is based also on agreement that we were able to ratify back in January. And meanwhile, we're protecting our sectors that are victim of U.S. protectionism.
Okay, Mr. Guglielmin, I'm going to start the clock again. You'll have a minute here, sir.
Minister, thank you for being here today. So earlier this month, you appeared at this committee, and my colleague Ted Falk asked you when the EV mandate would be repealed. And your exact words were, and I quote, "There are no EV mandates." Well, the very next hour, we had Brian Kingston here, who you know, from the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, and I reiterated your response to him, and he told the committee, and I'll quote him here, "The mandate is still in force today, and it continues to create financial and legal compliance burdens for companies." So, you know, given the fact that we're in this trade war and what businesses in this country need, especially the auto sector, is certainty. Which is it? Is the EV mandate repealed, as you suggested last time you were at committee, or is it still on the books, as the industry suggests?
So at the federal level, there's no EV mandate, and of course, don't take it from me. You can take it from the department, and my Assistant Deputy Minister will be able to answer that. I think that what Mr. Dixon was referring to is the fact that there is an EV mandate in Quebec and BC under provincial jurisdiction.
No,
and so
Minister, that's not what he was
in the auto
referring to.
strategy, it is clear, and our goal is to make sure that there's no EV
It's
mandate.
been repealed in rhetoric, but not in law. So according to the industry experts, that EV mandate's still very much in place. So we're just looking for a date when it's actually going to be repealed.
So,
It's
Mr.
going to be
Guglielmin,
my priority that it is repealed very, 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 very quickly, because basically we have said clearly that we're getting rid of it. So,
But it hasn't been done yet.
well, you know, that is not the information I have, and potentially Mr. Dixon and I need to talk to each other. No problem, we'll do that. But clearly, the goal of the government, and it is my order to my department, and also working with the Minister of Environment, which also agreed that basically, and of course under the Prime Minister's leadership, that we would repeal the EV mandate. So it is.
Can you
it is
report the
null
date back
So,
to this,
Mr.
to this
and
committee?
Mr.
basically,
Guglielmin,
there's no-
I've let this, I gave you 3 extra questions in 50 extra seconds, which I think was more than fair. I'm going to go now to Mr. Fanjoy. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. I understand you may be splitting your time with Monsieur Natumba as well.
Exactement. Minister, the Government of Canada recently launched a national electricity strategy, a plan to double our electric capacity, our electric grid, with clean, reliable, and affordable energy by 2050. How will a strengthened electrical grid support the growth of our domestic EV market and tie into the government's auto strategy? And specifically, how will it attract investments to Canada and boost EV demand? Thank you.
So thank you, Bruce. So there are a couple of things. First and foremost, the electricity strategy was important not only to make sure that we protect Canadians as electric demand is increasing, and so we want to make sure that the electricity prices stay at a reasonable rate, which is a big affordability issue. So that's been our priority. Second, we've been wanting to address the manufacturing part of the electricity front. What I mean by that is, when I was at Tenaris and Sault Ste. Marie, it is because of energy sectors projects linked obviously to the grid also that we will be able to increase the demand in steel in Canada, so in pipes and in tubes. The other thing is we just announced in Quebec, Hitachi, also a very important Japanese company investing in Canada in order to do more transformers. We need also, I've been in conversation with other Japanese companies wanting to invest in Ontario to be able to continue that supply chain that is so important. And I've been also in conversation with many major steel companies that are affected by the tariffs and now are looking to have a strong demand in Canada for their steel products in the context of the electricity strategy. So really, when you think about building Canada strong, that's what we mean. Now, to your question regarding EVs, we know that EVs, which at this point, I think by 2030, nearly half of, so 40% of all cars in the world will be EVs. And so that will have, of course, an impact here at home because we know that EV adoption is actually up. And we know that Canada and North America needs to be able to develop the latest and the best technology when it comes to the auto sector. And we have always done that, and we cannot be leapfrogged by other countries in the world. We need to be able to adopt these technologies. That's what Canadians, are looking for. And so, because that will have an impact on the grid, we also need to increase our electricity capacity, and that's why also the electricity strategy is so important to attract investments and also working with provinces and the territories to be able to have a full sovereign grid across the country, east-west. Thank you.
OK, Monsieur Natumba, à vous, monsieur. Il y a 2 minutes qui restent.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
2 minutes left. Thank you. Welcome, Minister. You were here 3 weeks ago, and welcome once again among us. When you appeared last time in April, you also spoke about a response to the new measures imposed by the U.S. There were another announcements made across the country My question is, after that tour and after that announcement, have you seen concrete impacts? And what are the impacts of that announcement throughout the country? Are you talking about steel and aluminum? Okay. I did see a very positive reaction, especially from the different, chambers of commerce, the Employers Association in Quebec, Ontario, and elsewhere. I also had a number of conversations with companies that were directly affected by the tariffs, BRP, for example, Manac, another company, and these were illegal and unjustified tariffs, so it was quite difficult. I know that we're coming here and offering help, and we're happy to support these businesses, but fundamentally we're trying to negotiate with the Americans. So we're trying to do both at the same time. We're trying to counter the impacts of the tariffs on our businesses, and we're also trying to come up with a long-term solution with the Americans, knowing that, of course, there's a lot of unpredictability because we're trying to, work with the White House here. Now, there is a plan in place. The Americans continue to make it difficult for us. What is your vision in the medium and long terms when it comes to supporting innovation in Canada? Well, despite everything, despite all of the uncertainty and insecurity created by these tariffs, and despite the fact that we're seeing a lot of insecurity around the world, geopolitically, especially with the fallout from the war in Iran, Canada in 2025 and in 2026 has been able to be the country of the G7 that has attracted the most foreign investment. That's significant. We know that we are very dependent on the U.S. for our exports, but despite it all, we have attracted those investments. We've worked very hard to attract them, of course, with our major projects around energy, transportation, ports, and so on, and then critical minerals. All of that helps. But at the same time, our objective is to protect the manufacturing sector. It is really what is targeted by the tariffs. So despite investments in the battery sector, there's LG, Volkswagen. We've also announced investments by Siemens, also investments in the aerospace sector, and more good news will come later this week. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Natumba. Mr. Sainte-Marie, if I add up all the seconds, you've got a few minutes left. There you go. Very clear, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I will start with the first 2 minutes and 30 seconds, if I've understood correctly. When we look at the different departmental plans, we're seeing the development and implementation of a series of industrial strategies and others, but I've counted 9: defense, automotive, quantum, tourism, and so on. And there's still nothing for the primary exporter in Quebec, aerospace. I'm very happy about the big contract for Airbus in Mirabel that was announced with AirAsia, and I understand that as part of the defense strategy, there will be a significant portion dedicated to aerospace. But Canada is the only country that has such a significant aerospace sector without an industrial strategy. Do you intend to put one in place? Currently, the aerospace sector, is really focused on, first of all, securing their investments, and we've seen that with Mirabel, and there's been other investments that reflect this. But when we talk about defense, what I'm being asked from the aerospace sector is, what will our policy be around industrial and technological spin-offs? It's a policy that's very well known, the ITB policy. That's what we're being asked. How will this be implemented, and how will defense supply be put into place for this sector? That's what I'm being asked. Of course, I want to do as much as possible for aerospace. That goes without saying. I'm from Quebec, and I have roots with Mirabel. I have my grandparents are from the region as well. But all that to say that currently I'm trying to concentrate on the sectors that are the most affected by the tariffs. So steel, aluminum, auto, the defense sector, because that covers the whole manufacturing sector. And now I'm working on a new strategy for life sciences, which are also very affected by Trump's policies. When the aerospace sector is affected, especially Bombardier, well, I speak with Éric Martel, the president, and I spoke to him again this morning. There are a lot of good news up and coming in the aerospace sector in the coming weeks. So as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's the same for the industry, things are improving. Thank you very much. Now I'm at my second chunk of 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Mr. Chair, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Committee, sir, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Minister, thank you for being here. It's nice to see you again. I wish some of your cabinet colleagues would also attend committee meetings when they're invited. So thank you.
I'll pass the word just for you.
Thank you for being here. Do you recall, and it's a line you've used a few times, in late February, you've used the line before in a CTV interview and also in a speech, Canadians will make the best cars in the world for the world. Do you remember that line?
Yeah, of course, and I stand by it.
Right, and so I guess, so is your position that Canadian automakers will export vehicles from Canada around the world to markets other than the United States?
Well, I think that Canadian automakers are reckoning the fact that there is an overdependency on the U.S. with 90% and more of the entire production being exported to the U.S. Now, we will anchor them and protect them, and we will support them. 75% of all the auto production in Canada is Honda and Toyota. And so I was on the phone even this weekend with Dave Jemison, the CEO of Honda Canada, to make sure that that's the case for Honda, and we'll do that for Toyota. But, for example, Ford, which is undergoing a major investment, the biggest investment in its history in Canada, $4 billion of investment, is actually looking also at exporting elsewhere. And that's part of their business model. And so I'm not stating this because it's something that I wish. It's based. No, but I just want to finish my phrase, my sentence. Sorry.
I'm just going to.
I just want to finish my sentence.
Yeah, I'm going to let you. I'm just going to explain.
But my point is, I'm getting that from automakers themselves.
Adam, don't worry. I'll pause it.
That's okay. So you believe that there is a business case that supports Canadian automakers exporting vehicles globally to markets outside the U.S. Is that correct?
Based on my conversation with them, that's what they're proposing us.
So are you aware, has your department done economic analysis on this business case? Like, is there economic analysis the government has done that shows it's viable for Canadian automakers to produce vehicles here to export them to Asia or Europe, as an example?
Or the Middle East. Well, that's exactly why the Prime Minister has been going around the world and signing 52...
The question is, are you aware of any economic analysis that your department or any department has done in the government that supports the notion that Canadian automakers will export or can export vehicles elsewhere?
So I get your point, but this is not up to the government to make that assumption. If the companies want to do that, and they're proposing that, we will support them. And that's exactly. I think also what they're looking at is passenger vehicles and also defense production. And so you're going to see that more and more as we're putting into place our defense industrial strategy.
So is your testimony that Canadian automakers have approached the government to say that they believe that there's a market, global market?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Honda and Toyota have told you, for example, that they believe they can build cars in Canada and export them to the Middle East, Asia, or elsewhere?
Two things. First, we've been approached by companies, and I can't say which one because obviously that is business confidential information, commercial,
private information.
Well, no company
has come to any of committees on Parliament Hill or gone to the media to suggest that this is a viable business plan.
Listen, I'm telling you that that's what we're getting as information. So also we have free trade agreements with many different markets and basically countries around the world. That also why it's important. But what I would say also is, of course, we know that the auto sector is affected by the tariffs. We know we need to protect the auto sector, and that is why we'll fight for it in the context of the revision of the USMCA.
So do you believe the Canadian auto sector can survive without access to the U.S. market?
I think that we need to be able to work on many scenarios, and right now, as the conversations with the U.S. government is continuing, we're also finding solutions to reopen Ingersoll and reopen Brampton.
Okay. My understanding is there's supposed to be a remissions process set up for the auto sector. It's been a year. My understanding is that remissions process is still not set up. Are you aware of that?
No, I think you're wrong. I think that the remission system was put into place a year ago because we had counter tariffs. So I just want you to understand the remission system.
So just if in my remaining time, if I'm wrong, do you think that you'd be able to provide to the committee the amount of money that's been remitted to Canadian automakers under the remissions process?
So we can definitely work on finding you the right information. But what I can tell you is the remission framework is a year old because it's based on counter tariffs. Now, what I think you're alluding to is the fact that in the auto strategy, we would be reviewing this remission framework, which we want to review because we want to be able to say to Honda and Toyota that actually have increased their production, that they would be able to increase their market access of cars made in the U.S. without tariffs.
Well, I look forward to the information that you'll share with the committee that shows the dollar value that Canadian automakers have
Mr.
received
Chambers and Minister, I'm
from the
going
government
to
for remission. Thank you.
direct the discussion to our final line of questioning. Mr. Mao, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir.
Chair. Hello, Minister. The government has produced a series of the domain-specific strategies covering domains like defense, auto, and electricity that you talked about earlier. Can you walk us through how these strategies intersect to help build Canada strong for our economy and particularly our workers?
Yes, of course. So thank you for that. We have worked to be able to protect jobs and create jobs, okay, and also attract talent and investments. So that has been the three pillars, the three priorities we're working on. On the protect front, what we want to do is obviously auto, fundamental, 500,000 new jobs impacted potentially. We're working night and day on protecting our auto sector. I was with Premier Ford on Friday. We spent an hour going through all the different investments. And I must say, our auto strategy is working. We have now a third shift in Windsor at Stellantis, where Cathy is coming from. We have also new investments that were announced 2 months ago, actually a month and a half ago, by GM in St. Catharines, $690 million in their engine facility. And we have the two new battery plants, the one in Windsor that has been opened, launched, started production, and the one that is being built in St. Thomas right now. So that's for auto. And also there were investments that I announced in Hanover and Siemens, Oakville, for battery production as well. So that's one thing. When it comes to steel and aluminum, I've just talked about it a lot because, of course, we need to adapt every time the Americans are changing their interpretation of tariffs, and that we're seeing that actually the plan is working. But I really think that what is really different from other, from past years is the defense industrial strategy is our way to be able to empower the manufacturing sector and potentially help the sector in the auto sector and steel and aluminum sectors by really being able to repurpose some of the plants or transition some of the workers towards the defense industry. We know that the support that we're giving to the Canadian Armed Forces can also be used as an important economic stimulus to protect the businesses that are affected by the tariffs, and we certainly intend to do that.
Thank you, Minister. So colleges, polytechnics, and similar industry training institutions have recently received $165 million investment from the government. So these institutions work directly with industry and to deliver and train the next generation of Canadians.
Yep.
Can you help us understand why colleges and institutions are so important in developing Canadian talent?
They are, because they do a lot of applied research, and so since they do so, they're able to train a lot of the students that eventually will work in the different sectors of the manufacturing sector. So I was with Dolly, our dear friend, in Scarborough, where we announced an important initiative across the country where basically we would be reinvesting in applied research. I think it was well received. And we were hearing, Dolly and I, so many testimonies, so many stories of students that may be working in AI right now, or working in order to eventually, get the right education to be able eventually to work in the transport system, to work in transportation system, industry, also in the aerospace industry, or also in the auto sector. So these are just examples of what we're able to support through our science funding.
Thank you. So I think you mentioned this earlier. Given the current fracturing world order, the government has worked to diversify Canada's trading relationships. What actions has the government taken to develop, maintain, and deepen our relationship with the old and new international partners?
So what is really important right now is we have to work on two fronts. We have to work to create new trade agreements, and that's definitely what the Prime Minister is working, 52 trade agreements, really, really important. And at the same time, all countries are reacting to protectionism. Mm-hmm. And so all of them, including, for example, the European Union, is closing its borders, for example, steel and aluminum, because, of course, they're reacting to U.S. protectionism and Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. What we need to do, and I've been working with the EU on that, is to make sure that Canada is not a collateral victim of that protectionism, and that we basically have a common market on steel and aluminum with the EU. We need to do that with Japan. We need to do that with other countries around the world. And so that's just an example of actually being able to align industrial policies, which is more than free trade, which is actually being able to have the same approach when it comes to our market economies, but also the same type of support. And that will have an impact because obviously Algoma Steel, for example, and I was at Algoma in the Sioux on Friday, was saying they plan to export steel to Europe. And because they have a new electric arc furnace, and obviously that would comply with the requirements, the European requirements. Same for aluminum. Aluminum is an important product that actually NATO will need. And a lot of the aluminum products are made either in Northern Europe or in Canada. So we need to be able also to have access to the European market. And I must say, my colleague Stéphane Séjourné, the industry minister of the European Union, and I have had very constructive conversations. He's coming to Montreal in 2 weeks, and I intend to continue the European-Canada, EU-Canada dialogue on this. And I really, really think that we can do more together.
Great. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Ma. Okay, colleagues, that brings us to the end of our first hour. We're going to suspend momentarily in order to...
hour, but Mark is so happy to be there for me.
I believe some ears perked up there, Minister, but I suspect there'll be plenty of side conversation. So with that, I'm going to suspend briefly. We'll come back, and Madame Huot and Mr. Sean will stay with us, although we may have a reduced second hour. Briefly suspended. We're going to start. We are going to cut the time down a little bit here because we're already about 35 minutes behind as a result of the votes, and I've got a couple of pieces of committee business that we have to deal with at the end. It won't take us too long, but we may call a little bit of an audible midway through here. Nonetheless, we've got 4 officials from the ministry joining us here today. Again, from the first hour, we're joined by the Acting Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Deputy Minister, Valérie Huot. We have Mark Shawn, Associate Deputy Minister, and then joining us as well is Stephanie Tonto, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Innovation Canada, as well as Samir, I had it down before, Samir Khabra. Do I have that right? I don't. Shabra. Oh, you know what? Here's the problem with my phonetics. I read your first name and your last name together. And when you do that, the phonetics get screwed up. I apologize significantly, Mr. Chabra, who is the DG Marketplace Framework Policy Branch from the ministry. So with that, we're going to go right into the first line of questioning, and that will go to our Conservative colleagues. And I'll turn the floor over to, I'm looking for Mr. Falk. Yep. Go ahead, sir. Good.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the department officials for coming to committee today to answer some of our questions and certainly satisfy our curiosity about things. Just want to start with a few questions about spaceport and the maritime launch services. We've heard some very interesting numbers out there. We've read some of these numbers that they've entered into a 10-year, $200 million lease on a property that the Maritime Launch Services has secured for roughly $13,500 a year. And I'm just wondering, is it your department that did the due diligence on the $200 million lease?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, it was not our department.
Okay, and which department would that have been?
It was the Department of National Defense that would have done that.
Okay, and not at all under your purview?
Correct.
Okay. Good, then we will move on. In 2025, 30.4% of performance indicators were met, while a large share were unmet or not measurable. And that comes from the results of Performance Management Program for Executives 2024-25. Can you explain to Parliament why this level of performance would be acceptable?
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair, for the question. The performance management framework as a whole looks to try and establish both credible and ambitious targets for executives to be able to ensure that their performance is well understood within the context of the public service. I think what we need to understand when we look at overall executive performance is that many of those metrics are individualized and are dynamic to a very, very changing and often agile kind of environment. And so insofar as those measures were either could not be recorded or were not met, it may be very much an indication of the fact that they evolved over the course of the year or the fact that there was changes to the nature of the work.
Okay, according to the Treasury Board Secretariat's 2025 results for the Executive Performance Management Program, almost $6 million was spent on performance pay within ISED. If so little performance indicators are met, why are executives continuing to be rewarded, and who makes those decisions as far as performance pay?
Thank you. So the performance pay overall framework is under the jurisdiction of both the mixture of our senior personnel and the Privy Council Office, and then by the Office of the Chief Human Resources Officer at the Treasury Board Secretariat. Individual allocation decisions for executives are made by the deputy head of the organization, who is the Departmental Accounting Officer. Performance pay is a mixture. It's worth noting that a good chunk of it is withheld pay for the purposes of basic performance. And then in very, very exceptional cases, there's additional performance pay that's allocated on an individual executive basis.
Okay. 316 out of 318, or 99.4% of executives from ISED received bonuses in 2025, while only 30.4% of performance indicators were met. What is the reason for such a great disparity between success and reward within the department?
So, as noted, there's two aspects of performance pay for executives within the overall rubric of the public service, and it's probably worth having a conversation with the Office of the Chief Human Resources Officer and the folks at the Treasury Board who set the overall framework. But as I noted, the vast majority of performance pay for executives is actually withheld pay for basic performance, and so that is actually allocated on the basis of meeting your overall basic assumptions of work. And then there's a very select number of individuals who receive bonuses on the basis of very exceptional performance indicators and an exceptional performance in a given year.
Okay, but it would appear that 99% of executives receive bonuses, while only
So
being
I think
30%.
I would have to double check your numbers, but Mr. Chair, my understanding is that 99% is reflective of the folks who would have received the basic amount of performance pay, which is the withheld pay for any given executive on the basis of base performance.
Okay, what's that? 1 minute, okay. With the EVs, we know that there's several EV investments that the Government of Canada has made. And we know that some of these plants are not moving in the direction that was anticipated. And I'm just wondering, could some factories leave or shrink once they're offered a better deal from another country? Have you done that analysis?
So, Mr. Chair, over the recent years, the federal and provincial government have collaborated with industry and attracted significant investments to support the transition to electric vehicle production and to establish a Canadian battery supply chain. We recognize that any industrial transformation takes time and that responsible risk-taking is part of supporting innovation in a competitive global economy. So while the time frame for specific projects may vary with market conditions, our automotive industry remains well positioned for long-term success. And I think each individual project obviously will go on its own trajectory, and the government seeks to support those investments as in such they materialize, and obviously continues to work with industry as they dynamically respond.
I'd like to get one more question in quickly. We know the EV market has shrunk down to 8% of overall Canadian vehicle sales. There's roughly $34 billion of investment the Canadian government has committed to. How much of that is at risk?
So I think, Mr. Chair, I think the overall envelope of funding that we've provided for the auto industry, we've tried to dynamically respond to the realities of the industry. And so I think it would be difficult for me to talk about how a percentage of risk, because I think we continue to work with industry to ensure that we can be there for what they need.
Is the money all out the door?
Mr. Falk, I'm going to...
That was it?
Yeah, that was it. I permitted an extra question for you there. Okay, we're going to go to you, Mr. Bardizzi, for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions about auto and then a couple of questions about other policy files. So in the earlier round, there were some questions around the remissions framework. And I'm wondering if you can just explain the government's thinking for the creation of the remissions framework, and then maybe a bit of explanation about how it works.
Yeah, so I think, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think as it relates to the remissions framework, we want to make sure that the framework aligns Canada's trade policy with the industrial and workforce objectives, including exploring the introduction of a tradable credit system. So the initial remissions framework, as the Minister noted, was essentially to try and respond to the tariffs that were in place and ensure that as we were collecting counter tariffs, there was the opportunity to be able to disperse those funds. I think the opportunity now that presents itself in the revised auto strategy is to look at a tradable system. Public consultation has been launched and is focused on leveraging that framework to reinforce domestic production and to attract investment. So how can we actually ensure that there's reward for folks who are making significant investments here and allow that remission framework to essentially potentially allow for their overall production to continue to be exported and imported at reasonable tariffs.
And the framework also rewards companies that are doing the manufacturing here in Canada at levels that are consonant with or in excess of what is being sold here in Canada.
That's right. So as noted, the public consultation imagines a credit system that does provide significant incentive to allow for enhancements to production here, including for the purposes of export.
There were a few questions as well about the future export footprint of Canadian autos outside the United States. And I'm just wondering if you can speak more generally to not just the vehicle itself, but some of the inputs into vehicles, including software, including critical minerals, which then result in battery supply chains. And can you just speak to the growth of that part of the assembly and auto sector as being different than what we've seen perhaps in past generations of auto assembly in Canada?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think the traditional logic has been that the auto value chain is one of heavy inputs that potentially restrict their overall mobility. But I think what the reality is that increasingly cars become more agile and dynamic, and the overall automotive sector becomes one that is a pairing of inputs on the critical mineral side at the very beginning of the value chain through to the actual dynamic parts process, then through to software and continued electronics, that you actually have a greater amount of potential to be able to influence the overall supply chain with areas of comparative advantage. And so you take, something like, the firm BlackBerry, for instance, which is in their automotive division producing significant amounts of software to try and ensure the continued mobility and protection of the vehicle. And again, then you can also look at some of the areas where you may be able to have specialized vehicle capacity that is more exportable or potentially have a comparative advantage because it's a niche market. And so I think what the auto strategy seeks to do is to try and make sure that where Canada has opportunities within that full chain, whether it be all the way at the input side through to the input side of whether or not it's actual applications living on top of the vehicle itself, that we're pursuing where Canada can play to its strengths.
And presumably that also includes the kinds of investments that the government might be making in research, in IP protection, the kinds of things that can not only result in more exportability, but result in more value capture in Canada. That would be part of the overall thinking around the policy, would it be?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think you need to take it as a basket of approaches, including for those that are in either the software or some of our ICT sectors, where they may not be seen as traditional auto parts providers, but actually are now part of a connected sort of approach. And so insofar as our overall strategy is trying to wrest as much intellectual property here in Canada, maximize the comparative advantage of our overall IP generation, and then find the places where it can slot into appropriate sectors, I think that's part of the broad vision.
The estimates also reflect some increased investments in research more broadly through the three main granting councils, but also through defense research. And I'm just wondering if you could share the intended impact of those investments, not just for the researchers themselves, but potential downstream beneficiaries in the economy.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think it's worth understanding the research as, in many ways, an industrial strategy. So though you can take everything from the $1.7 billion of the Impact Plus program of attracting talent to the country, but then the significant increases to the granting councils, and then the work that those councils and some of our applied research programs are playing in things like the Defense Industrial Strategy, where you can really see the connection between base intellectual capacity and actual industrial output. And so even things like the recent additions to the College Community Innovation Program, work through the National Research Council's IRAP program, a bunch of these are pairing industrial capacity with academic capacity to actually be able to fit into these sectors that are kind of hot and emerging at the moment, where Canada's got a real opportunity.
OK, merci beaucoup. Monsieur Saint-Marie, 6 minutes à vous, monsieur.
Mr. Saint-Marie, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to For Review. First question. I'll go back to before the last election. Mr. Champagne was the Minister of Industry. He had held roundtables with aerospace sector players with the idea of coming up with an aerospace strategy for the 2024 budget. Does the department intend to make public the results of those consultations? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I don't know if the results of those consultations had been made public, but the results, in principle, are part of the Defense Industrial Strategy. As the Minister said, it is a strategy that includes all capabilities of the aerospace sector, and the idea is to promote their activities, because now their sector is really at the heart of the government's efforts. Another subject, when it comes to clean technology, the number of projects supported by the department that have a clean technology component should go from 100, it went from 136 last year, and there'll be a decrease of 27% this year, according to the departmental plans. I get the impression that the government is abandoning the environment on this front. Can you explain why the number of projects have gone down by 87%, rather, correction? Thank you. When it comes to clean technologies, there are funds that are earmarked for clean technology. As with my response for the aerospace sector, now all of that is encompassed along with the other sectors. The reality is that there's an aspect of clean technology that is part of many projects. So for companies that are pursuing clean technology in a given sector, well, they can access government support from another fund, and that other fund might be better adapted to them. Thank you very much for that response. Continuing with departmental plans, one can read that the government will reduce some entrepreneurship and innovation programs, including the Canadian Fund for Innovation, but it doesn't specify which ones. I'd like to ask you if you can tell us what exactly will be cut. And if you don't have that information now, you could always forward it to the clerk. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada ensures that departmental expenses are profitable and provide results for Canada. As part of the comprehensive expenditure review, well, priorities have been redefined for these programs, and that's for sciences, among others, in order to avoid overlap and to be in line with the minister's mandate. There are efficiency gains, additional efficiency gains, and it's by simplifying these structures that we'll be able to do that. We will continue with economic growth across the country. We want to continue with ambitious goals, all while being fair. We're currently reducing costs, and in the next plan, it will be more clear what the key elements are, because this is a 3-year exercise, and the department has to remain agile. And of course, the department has also received funds for other priorities, but it will be made clear in the next departmental plan. Thank you very much for the response. Another subject now. One can see that the government is doing a lot to attract foreign investment. There's the Indian delegation today. Later this week, the Prime Minister will be going to New York. And that's good news. But there are concerns, nevertheless. For example, if some businesses are taken over where critical minerals are concerned, your department, is it studying the impacts of this foreign investment, especially in strategic sectors? In your opinion, would there be, could it be possible that certain things are blocked if it goes against the national interest? What type of analysis do you plan on doing for this foreign investment? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I am the Associate Deputy Minister, but I'm also in charge of investment for the Canadian Investment Act. So I've got 2 mandates. It's very important that we enhance the ability for Canada to diversify. This is really important for our businesses, and it's important for foreign investment. We have to have access to markets. It's also important that we protect Canada's knowledge and our intellectual property, among other things. We really have to strike a balance between the two. But we are very comfortable blocking any investments that would be harmful to the Canadian economy. But we also want to have a more open approach so that Canadian businesses can access the necessary capital to grow in international markets. Thank you once again for all of your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
What we'll do is go to Ms. Borelli for 5 minutes, Ms. Begum for 5 minutes, and then that will conclude our line of questioning, and we've got a little bit of committee business to do once we allow our colleagues to go. But with that, Ms. Borelli, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Hewitt, Witnesses previously came to committee during our study into the advanced manufacturers and metallurgical sectors that many SMEs are facing excessive pressure due to the new 232 tariffs as of April 6th. And they specifically said that loans will not help them since they are already operating at a loss with the burden of these new tariffs. The minister came out during that study, actually on the last day of that study, and made the announcement of the various loans that would be available to these companies who are suffering these tariff pressures. Why did the industry department decide to provide debt-driven support versus direct assistance for manufacturers and SMEs?
Thank you so much for the question. I'll start simply because as the associate deputy, I have the policy responsibilities as opposed to the CFO who would be responsible for the accounting. I think it's important to recognize that it's a diversified approach that's been taken by the government in respect to the changing nature of 232 tariffs. While some of those supports are in fact loans, many of them are actually repayable or non-repayable contributions depending on the mechanism that's in place.
Excuse me, I fully understand the different offers that were made and the $1 billion to the BDC through the BDC and the $500 million through FedDev. What I'm asking is, why were loans offered when testimony was already given that loans wouldn't help them, that they needed tariff relief?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Again, just to note that including through mechanisms like the regional development agencies, the approach is actually often a mixture of both repayable and non-repayable contributions, depending on the public benefits that are created by the project at play. And so I think it's important to look at it as a balanced approach that uses a distinct variety of instruments, recognizing the needs of industry.
Okay, thank you very much. So some of these larger companies are able to hire consultants and lawyers to apply for the loans because it's very, very complicated to apply for these loans. Small and medium and some medium SMEs could not. They cannot spare the staff to do that. So really, they're very insistent that the tariff relief is what they need. They cannot repay the loans. They're not operating at a profit. So thank you very much. I'm going to share the rest of my time with MP Dancho.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I did want to ask about the impact assessment, the impact analysis that your department has done or perhaps has done regarding the import of the 49,000 Chinese EVs. Could you provide that analysis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question, and thank you also to the member who happens to be my parents' MP. So appreciate that. Just to note on the question of the analysis, as the minister noted, the amount of 49,000 is a small increase from the 43,000 imports that were part of the previous process, and so we did look at the overall makeup of the imports of vehicles, and obviously assessed it alongside those previous numbers.
I see. So you sort of updated your analysis from what you did before they were banned. Is that correct?
I think we took stock of the fact that the pre-ban was already 43,000 vehicles coming into the country.
So you did an analysis of the impact of North American manufactured automobiles? Is that part of the analysis, I suppose, is my question?
So our industry sector, which has a dedicated division related to the automotive and transportation industries, has a constant evolving analysis of the overall state of the industry. It has very close connections with the industry and the manufacturers here. And so it's not a singular analysis. It's a continued relationship with the industry to make sure that we know how it's playing out and what exactly is the requirements.
Could you provide some of that analysis to committee?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair, to go back and see what might be possible to share in with respect to our overall assessment of the auto sector of Canada.
And this analysis was done prior to the agreement with China, is that correct?
So as I note, we have a dedicated sector that has a full unit that continuously works with the auto sector. It's not a single point in time. It's a fundamental part of our job as the industry department to make sure that we have a very strong and robust analysis and understanding of the auto sector.
And the name of that part of your department is
so it's the industry sector, and it's the automotive and transportation industries branch within it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Bigham, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate you all being here today. I want to continue on this line of questioning for the auto sector. Recently, EVs made up for about 12.2% of the total auto sales in Canada in March. And we know what's happening and the struggle that we face, especially in the face of tariffs. Why is it important to ensure that auto sector has a strong and diverse auto expert capacity?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. As someone who has worked in the department for a long time, I can say that our commitment to the auto sector and its unique economic benefits is longstanding. And I think one of the reasons why that support has been because of the diversified nature of the economic benefits it produces. When you look at the overall supply chain and the continuous amount of small firms that continue to support overall inputs, when you then add in, as per the question from one of your colleagues, some of the new inputs that are going into vehicles, it's simply a very significant force multiplier of economic benefit, jobs, and stable production that allows for Canadians both to have access to product, but also jobs, capacity, and overall economic well-being. And so I think our support for the auto sector is premised on this notion that we need to make sure that we have the capacity to be able to maximize those jobs, that production, and then find the markets where it can potentially best be suited. And so that continues to assess the emerging markets that potentially are in some of these areas of comparative advantage.
Thank you very much. I know I have limited time, so I want to ask also about something that's dear to my heart and some of the work that I've done in my previous position as a provincial member. And something that I'm really excited our government is working on, which is to have all Canadians have access to broadband internet by 2030. And I know a lot of folks, especially rural communities, primarily Indigenous communities, really struggle with that, and it hinders their ability to do almost everything else and to excel, to be able to flourish and prosper within their communities. How does Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada assess the likelihood of achieving the connectivity goal by 2030, and particularly for rural communities and Indigenous communities?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for the question. So the operations of the Universal Broadband Fund, which is the primary program for which the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development pursues the government's connectivity goals, it should be noted at outset that it's one program. There are a number of other elements. The CRTC has its own programming that is related to building out infrastructure capacity, as does our colleagues at Indigenous Services Canada. But the UBF is premised on a fairly significant continuous mapping of the overall connectivity rate within Canada, including the number of households that have access to what we consider to be high-speed internet or 5010, as we kind of define it in the standard in terms of the upload and download speed. And so we are routinely assessing, and when we do an intake of new projects with each province, we are able to assess the overall current baseline rate, and then as the project actually moves through, the degrees to which it will allow us to be able to get to those households that potentially right now are actually not within the standard of our high-speed internet. And so our current assessment continues to be that we are on track, and that our investments are actually continuing to provide that very meaningful and very important connectivity for a whole host of communities. It will come through a diversity of approaches in a number of these places. We need to be very sensitive to the notion of what's going to work in terms of connectivity. But that's why we take both a regional and a place-based approach to ensuring that we actually have the projects in place that will ensure all Canadian households have access to high-speed internet by 2030.
Would you be able to, Chair, do I have some time left? Yeah. Would you be able to just elaborate in terms of how many additional households, businesses, and communities the department expects to be able to connect to broadband internet, and in terms of the funding that's been invested?
Mr. Chair, I would be happy to come back to the committee with our current statistics on the performance of the Universal Broadband Fund, including the recent projects that have come online and those that are in the pipeline, to be able to ensure that we are meeting our goal as we live out that program's important contributions.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you.
Do you want to?
Quick one if you want, Madame O'Rourke, but...
I'm good, thanks.
Through you, Chair, to, I believe, Mr. Sean, this committee studied AI. We looked at a number of investments in AI. I'm wondering how quickly those investments are rolling out and what the plan is to assess the return on investment of those AI investments.
Mr. Chair, so just recognizing time is tight, but the investments that have been made over the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, and then particularly the budget 2024 investments of $2 billion, both in AI infrastructure, but also supports for commercialization and adoption, the vast majority of those are starting to either crystallize or are already out. And so I'm happy to come back to be able to ensure that we outline the benefits that are being accrued. But for instance, we've had our initial investments through our Compute Access Fund. We've had some of our deals through our Compute Challenge program, and then our request for proposals for our sovereign compute infrastructure program, the supercomputer that will drive AI capacity for our research and as a test bed for industry. That RFP closed on the 1st of June, and we are very excited to advance that process. And then hopefully you'll see some more forthcoming announcements as we finalize the AI strategy for the country.
Fantastic, thanks.
OK, merci, Mme O'Rourke. Et parce qu'il a exprimé son...
And I would like to, in fact, our colleague would like to apologize for exceeding his time earlier. Mr. Sainte-Marie, I'll give you the last few moments. Oh, thank you. I will be eternally grateful to you. To replace the Aurora fleet, the government chose Boeing rather than Bombardier. However, last week we learned that Boeing is going to deliver its aircraft 3 years late. Is it too late to buy Canadian? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The decision to buy an airplane is a decision made by our colleagues at the Department of Defense. And so that's a question for that department. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time today.
Mme Huot, Mr. Sean, Mme Tonton, and Mr. Chabra for being here. Very much appreciate your testimony and insight. Wish everybody a wonderful rest of your day. Colleagues, we have a few matters to discuss very briefly, but witnesses, you are permitted to go. A few things. The first is we have a $500 budget just for this extra meeting that we need to approve. Seeing no opposition, I'm going to call that approved. We have to pass an informal, a motion rather, for an informal meeting that we have coming up on Thursday. Unfortunately, I have to return to Winnipeg to attend a funeral service, so Madame Dancha will be in the chair on Thursday. We do have a delegation that features the State Minister, Dr. Florian Herman, who's the head of the Bavarian State Chancellery, along with members from the Standing Committee of National Defense that are going to be joining us. So we have a regular meeting that will start at 11 o'clock. We just have to have agreement that everybody is okay with this informal meeting. I suspect that's okay. Okay, excellent. And the most important matter of business is in regards to the committee actually passing various line items of the main estimates that we were just engaging with officials on. It's my responsibility as chair, as you may know, to report back to the House on behalf of the committee in relation to this. There are quite a few. I might suggest that the easiest way for us to proceed, and I did have conversations with the representatives from each political party around the table earlier, so I hope that we can move forward in this way, but it's simply to grant unanimous consent for the passage of all line items related to the main estimates that flow through this committee. Should I not receive unanimous consent, I'll go through all of them individually, which of course is the will of the committee. But I'm going to just look to seek unanimous consent. Si tu veux, oui, toujours distance.
If you wish, yes, dissenting is an option, even for you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
So then, colleagues, with that, I will take your direction to report. Pardon me? Go ahead. I will take your direction to report the main estimates on the committee's behalf back to the House. I'm just looking for agreement on that.
Report on division.
Okay. Okay, supported on division. Okay. So with that, colleagues, merci pour un bon après-midi.
Thank you for an excellent afternoon together, as usual.
Will be in the chair on my behalf so that I can attend a service on Thursday in my riding, but very much confident that we will be able to continue to have a productive set of conversations. With that, meeting adjourned.